And, we have things like MBA rankings, socioeconomic status, etc. Right? And now I want you to create a formative indicator for your construct. Whatever construct you're interested in, put together a formative indicator. And you may ask, what is a formative indicator? And so I'm going to say socioeconomic status. Okay, and I show it in two different ways. I show income, education, occupational status, combining in some weighted way to lead to socioeconomic status. Or I show income, education, occupational status, combining to lead to one measure of socioeconomic status rather than the construct itself. Okay, two different ways of depicting. The one on the top, in my view, is obviously what is accurate because it's a measure. It's one way of looking at socioeconomic status. And I'm going to say, I'm going to take 50% of what your income is, weighted by 50%, I mean. Your education, I'm going to weight by 30, and occupation status by 20%. I'm just making up those numbers. If you go and take a look at my link, they'll tell you different ways of doing this. That is a measure that's a formative measure. It is different from a reflective measure. Okay? A formative measure is like a causal indicator. You have predetermined that alumni salary, research rankings, etc. will form a measure of MBA quality, right? So it's formative. It causes the measure. An effects indicator or a reflective indicator says there is something called P&I in here, okay? And because there is this thing called P&I respond, and that's the cause, and the effect is on my response on these items. It reflects my P&I, and it's the effect of my P&I. So reflective versus formative measures differ fundamentally in whether they are causal formative or effect reflective. I got some amazing scholars cited here. And I should note that I was so honored that Professor Bagozzi wrote the foreword to my book on measurement. Effect indicators are those where constructs cause responses on indicators or items. Causal indicators cause or form the overall measure of a construct. For example, a measure of socioeconomic status is defined by a weighted combination, predetermined, right? It's not the idea of each item is a measure. The measure of a construct by definition is caused or formed by its indicators. On the other hand, effect or reflective indicators are caused by the constructs. In other words, they reflect the P&I, right? So the question I had was any change in psychometric properties? Do we need coefficient alpha, right? And there was one no and many maybes. There's even more yeses. But this is the model for P&I. Reflective effects indicator. So what happens? Each item is a measure, right? And you throw out 2-3 items, it doesn't matter. But each item is a measure of this latent thing called P&I. With MBA rankings and socioeconomic status, you can't just throw out something, right? You've predetermined that occupational status, education, and so on, by definition, form a measure. So how can you throw them out, right? And so therefore, do you expect internal consistency as in item to total correlation and intra-item correlation between, let's just say, MBA, alumni salary, research ranking, etc.? Is each a measure of MBA quality, or is each an integral, indispensable part that you have predetermined to then form the measure, right? Why would you expect internal consistency, right? The nature of the indicators is pertinent to the psychometric assessment. Such as internal consistency are relevant only for effect indicators, wherein each item is a measure of the construct. I didn't mean to trick you, but I wanted to bring this out. The whole idea of internal consistency is each item is a measure, therefore it moves together. The whole idea in a formative measure is the exact opposite. I'm going to put in these components, predetermined, weighted by me, and that's what leads to the measure. Hence, these, in the case of PNI, they should be correlated to each other. Informative indicators do not need to be correlated. They form the measure of the construct by definition. Internal consistency, factor loadings are not appropriate. If income and education are component of socioeconomic status, by definition, there is no requirement that they be positively correlated. Test retest correlation can be applied, as long as the phenomenon hasn't changed over time. So in comparing reflective and formative indicators, consider two different approaches to measuring a company's customer orientation. A reflective or effect indicator could be developed through statements that reflect an organization's intentions or descriptions of practice. We think customer orientation is very important. Strongly agree. I'm just being simple here. An underlying emphasis on customers leads to responses to certain statements. Alternately, a formative indicator could be formed through collecting behavioral data, percentage of customer complaints, address, speed of service. And you say, I'm going to form an overall indicator. Thus, aspects such as speed of service and complaints can be combined to form a formative indicator, which is defined by its components. In formative indicator models, a measure exists only if each component is captured, right? By definition, the measure is a combination of certain necessary components. That's how you've defined it. For reflective indicators, each item is a measure. However, because a sufficiently broad domain is captured, each item may capture a different but related aspect. Enjoyment of numbers, importance of numbers, etc. Each item is a measure, therefore items are strongly related to each other. So are you now ready to create a formative indicator for your construct? Example of formative indicator of your own construct, a formative measure. You're going to create one, okay?